we've long wanted to have as a keynote speaker. So please welcome Ross Anderson.
Thanks, Martijn. Well, the internet is becoming the internet of things. And for people in our trade, of course, that suggests that we're about to see an internet of bad things, which will be interesting and fun to study, and will have all sorts of implications for industry, policy, and so on. So I remember when viruses first came along. I was working for Barclays at the time. It was just after the Morris worm. Since then, it's become largely a PC thing. But this is now going to change, because when you've got CPUs and communications and everything that cost you more than about $10, then you're going to find every industry becoming a bit like the software industry. You're going to have the good, the bad, and the ugly. You'll have the platforms on which you can innovate rapidly. The bad will include things like malware, and the ugly will include things like monopoly. So how's the world going to change? Well, there's going to be a very much greater variety of bad actors, and there are going to be much more subtle threat models. Now, Martijn already referred to one particular kind of bad actor. Here's Herr Winterkorn, who used to be running Volkswagen until a few days ago, and that's what happened to their share price. Malware can also be put in by the vendors. And this is going to be an issue with more and more of the Internet of Things. Vehicle fuel economy is a continuing story. Smart meters and domestic energy efficiency, something we've been involved in. If you're interested in the safety of medical devices, read the papers by Harold Thimbleby on how medical devices kill more people than road traffic accidents do. The London GP Ben Goldacre blogs about surveillance of drug efficacy and safety, and how big data results from medical records are manipulated by drug companies to sell us pills that are dangerous. And then, of course, there are all the social issues that come with artificial intelligence. If you no longer know what the rules are, whereby you grant people credit, because it's all done by machine learning, how can you know that you're not unlawfully discriminating? And then, of course, there's going to be government malware. In 2008-9, we wrote about the snooping dragon, about Chinese malware that we found implanted in the Dalai Lama's office PCs. Then in 2011, the Chaos Computer Club people found the Bundestrojaner, a German government malware used to snoop on enemies of the state. And Ed Snowden told us about Warrior Pride, mobile phone malware that the NSA deploys, and which reports back to a botnet, rather than reporting back to the fort directly. Now let's try and think ahead a little bit. Recently we found, for example, that Barbie is putting microphones in their Barbie dolls so that your kid's doll can do voice recognition. The problem is, if you do voice recognition in the doll, then the battery lasts for a day. So if you've got Wi-Fi, everything that your kid says gets sent off to a data center in Oregon where the speech recognition gets done and the commands are produced. So in future, if you're the FBI and you want to wiretap John Gotti Jr., perhaps you get a warrant to wiretap his kid's doll. Is this within the scope of what people expect socially? Or what about the emergency assist button in his car? Even if he's got his phone turned off, his car's still got a microphone that can be hacked remotely. And what about your smart meter? The drug squad are really keen to know who's running an awful lot of lamps. So will there be a warrant to install police malware in your electricity meter? And whose fault is it then if your electricity bill goes through the roof because of a software error? And in fact, one court case that we have at the moment in the UK before the Investigatory Powers Tribunal is a court case on computer and network exploitation. And basically the argument is this: Her Majesty's government says that they need only one warrant to rule them all, that every 6 months the Foreign Secretary will sign a piece of paper for GCHQ saying, guys, you can hack any machine in the world that you like, and you can put any malware on any machine for any purpose, and don't bother me because I'm the minister. And a number of NGOs are saying, no, this is wrong. It's perfectly okay for the police to hack a target's PC or mobile phone or Barbie doll or car microphone or whatever, but there must be a very detailed warrant whereby the authorities have shown probable cause or reasonable suspicion and detailed exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to be controlled. That's an example of how policy will hit the Internet of Things. And that's a case that is in progress right now. So, where does malware go beyond your phone and your laptop and your kid's Barbie doll and your car? Well, one of the things that we've been looking at is chip and pin terminals. The EMV protocol suite, the Europay MasterCard Visa protocol, also known as chip and pin, is the set of payment protocols which support bank cards with smart card chips in them. And this was developed in the late 90s and deployed in the UK from 2003, and it's now being deployed also in the USA. And there's a fascinating story of failures and frauds, which we've accumulated largely in papers on our website. And there's an awful lot of lessons for security engineers in many fields, but there are particular lessons for people worried about malware in supposedly secure terminals. Now, the concept of operations for EMV is that you make forgery harder by replacing the mag strip with a chip, and the chip authenticates the card, right? Although you can reverse the chip, it costs you a lot of money, you need fancy equipment, and the yield is low, usually much lower than the value of the funds available in an account. So that's kind of okay. And you make the authentication of the cardholder stronger by replacing the signature with a PIN. And that's slightly problematic because it shifts liability from the bank to the user, but we'll come back to that later. And the idea is that you keep verifying PINs online at ATMs, but you verify on the chip at merchant terminals, which means that you have the PIN now in the card. And finally, you encourage deployment by making the merchant liable if the PIN isn't used. This is the liability shift that's used to persuade merchants to spend billions of dollars on buying fancy terminals that are supposedly certified secure. So did it work? Well, the banks hoped that fraud would go down, but it went up. And then it went down a bit, and then it went up again. And you can see from the graph here that it's actually quite complex. The first thing that happened after chip and PIN was deployed was that the red graph, that is cardholder not present fraud, shot up. So all the criminals said, fine guys, online is obviously the place to go, and they went online and they started buying stuff on Amazon and shipping it to empty houses and so on. The line underneath it, the yellow line, that's counterfeit. And that initially went down and it went up once the bad guys realized that now that there's chip and pin terminals everywhere, you could put bad software in them or bad hardware, and you could harvest people's card and pin details and then use them, for example, to make magstripe cards that you use in America. And there have been various other things going on with the less significant types of fraud. So how can you attack EMV? Well, the EMV people basically attacked themselves because initially they made the system so complicated that there were feature interactions in the hardware security modules that are used in banks to manage cards and pins. And we had some great fun in the early 2000s finding these feature interactions, API security we call it, because once you have got a security module with hundreds of different API calls, saying, for example, decrypt this pin with a key that belongs to Visa and re-encrypt it with a key that belongs to such and such an ATM, then by using unexpected combinations of these transactions, you can get keys and pins out. And in particular, Visa broke the entire world fleet of hardware security modules by specifying an insecure transaction that everybody had to implement. This was basically an encrypt a key transaction which had in the header a variable length text field, and by varying the length of this text field, you could arrange that the last byte and then the last 2 bytes and so on would overlap the pin block, and so you could do key search 1 byte at a time. And that was a paper we came out with in 2007. But that got fixed before there were any serious problems in the field. So what can you do when you've got chip and pin? Well, you can attack the terminal. So if you Google for chip and pin terminal playing Tetris, you'll see a video we made back in 2005 where we took a chip and pin terminal, we gutted it, we put in completely new electronics and programmed it to play Tetris. This was a way of bringing it across even to journalists and even to bankers that random electronic devices that you come across in the street can do arbitrary things. And the idea that we had is that you might be able to use this to do a man-in-the-middle attack. So, for example, I make a bad parking meter. I get a vacant lot. I put a parking meter there that's got a dodgy chip and pin terminal. £2 to park your car. Somebody goes in, puts their card in, puts in their PIN. Meanwhile, I have got a bogus card attached to a mobile phone. It goes beep. It says there's a sucker at my terminal. So I go into Graff's the Jewelers. I buy a £10,000 diamond ring, and the transaction is simply relayed. We demonstrated that for journalists, but it's too hard to industrialize. It was just a sort of fun thing for the TV. So what actually happened? Well, we started paying attention to this in about 2007 when there was a report that about 230 people had had their cards cloned after they used their cards at a BP garage in Girton, just north of Cambridge. And what seemed to have happened was that the chip and pin terminal in the garage had somehow been compromised. Now, if you go online and look at the specifications of the terminal, it's supposed to be tamper resistant because the pin goes from the pin entry device to the card in the clear, and card data flow the other way, that is, account number, expiry date, and so on. And back then, Visa's website was saying that these terminals were evaluated under the common criteria. And if you went and downloaded the associated protection profile, you found that it should supposedly cost $25,000 per pin entry device to defeat the tamper response mechanisms. And so we went on eBay and we bought a number of terminals and we tore them down and looked at what they were doing. And here you can see, for example, the red circles are circling 4 studs, which make connections to 4 switches on the circuit board on the right, and the result of this is that if you lift the top of the casing of the pin entry device, this sends an alarm and the keys are zeroized and the terminal is in effect turned into a brick. In addition to that, there are tamper responding meshes around sensitive pieces of circuitry, and the designers had obviously given some thought and effort to trying to forestall all kinds of probing attack. But this turned out not to be the case, because when our grad students had stared at this for about a week, they figured that if you drilled through the back of the casing, where there was a convenient slot, supposedly for the later installation of a cryptographic device, then it was possible to drop a paperclip onto the serial link that went from the card to the pin pad, which carried the pin in one direction and the card details in the other direction. And so despite the fact that it supposedly cost $25,000 to tamper with this device, it actually cost about $1 worth of materials in about 3 minutes worth of effort. So we phoned up GCHQ and we said, guys, you've got a problem with this common criteria evaluation of the Ingenico pin pad. And he said, nothing to do with us, Squire, that wasn't common criteria certified. We've not seen the evaluation report, so it's not part of our system. Okay. So we phoned up Visa and we said, look, you're saying that these terminals are common criteria evaluated, but we found a trivial attack on them and GCHQ says it's not their problem because they're not part of the common criteria system. What's going on? And Visa said, well, we didn't want to show the evaluation report to GCHQ because that would be bad for security, but we did follow the common criteria procedure in every other respect. And that's why we're only claiming that they're common criteria evaluated. Oh, I said, I wonder if you could tell us who the clef was, please. Oh, no, we couldn't do that for reasons of commercial confidentiality. So we call GCHQ again, and I say, look, these guys are passing off your brand, right? The common criteria brand is being brought into disrepute. Why don't you slap a DMCA notice on them and take down their website? Oh my God, they said we could never possibly do that. So the certification mechanism for pin entry devices is totally broken with the connivance of everybody involved in the system, and GCHQ won't defend the brand. So we ran this on telly in 2008, and APAX, the bank's trades union, said it wasn't a problem because most criminals weren't as clever as Cambridge research students were. However, White man speak with forked tongue, as they said in the movies. And it turned out that even at the time, there was a problem they knew about and weren't talking about. And in July 2008, a chap called Imran Khan, not arrested in Birmingham. And what he and his brother had done was to get access to the warehouse in Dubai, where the Ingenico terminals stopped to catch breath en route from the factory in China. And he had been putting wicked electronics in them, with the result that when these terminals arrived in shops and bank branches in the UK and in the Netherlands, they already had little mobile phones in them that would SMS your card and PIN details to Karachi. So he was waiting trial for 3 years, and eventually in October 2011 he walked because the banks decided not to offer any evidence against him. So this is how the world breaks. This is how certification schemes break. Nobody has got enough incentive to step up to the plate and own the problem and make sure that stuff works. Everybody hides behind somebody else. So here's how a normal EMV transaction happens. First of all, the card sends its details signed with a digital signature to the PIN entry device. The merchant puts in the amount that he wants and gets you to put in your PIN. Then the PIN and the transaction description are sent to the card. The card then decides whether the PIN's okay, yes or no, and sends an authorization cryptogram. In the effect that it's a chip and signature transaction, there isn't a PIN sent to the card, and an authorization cryptogram comes back nonetheless. The cryptogram is computed with a key which is shared between the card and the bank issuer, the bank which issued the card. So the merchant can't check that, so he sends it to the bank for checking, and the bank also checks that those funds are credit available, and if so, it sends a transaction authorization. There's then a separate step conducted via a separate system where they do settlement and reconciliation. But that's the basic flow of the transaction. Now, among the details that go in message 3 are a random number, a number that is called the unpredictable number in the EMV documentation. And that's there basically in order to prevent transaction replay, which will be of relevance later. So what you've got in stripped down protocol notation is that the terminal sends a number, this random unpredictable number ends at the card with the date D and the amount X. There's other stuff there such as terminal characteristics and country code and so on, but they don't really matter for our purposes. So the payment is authorized by means of this authorized authentication request cryptogram, ARQC, which is a MAC on N, D, and X. So what happens if I can predict N for D? In other words, if the unpredictable number isn't unpredictable after all. And the answer is that if I've got access to your card, I can pre-compute an ARQC for amount X and date D. So does this happen? Well, hey. Back in 2011, in June, there's a Mr. Gambin from Malta, who was a customer of HSBC, went on holiday to Mallorca. And he ate a meal at a dodgy restaurant that may have been owned by some local crime gang or another. And the following day, there appeared 4 ATM transactions on his account, and he swears that he hadn't been near the ATM. So he went to HSBC and complained, and they said, sorry, Squire, this is chip and PIN, it's secure, so you must be mistaken or lying. He came to us, we told him what sort of words to use to demand logs from the bank, and we got the transaction records. And in the right-hand column here, you can see the values of N, the unpredictable number. And as you can see, that doesn't look very unpredictable. And if you stare at the data a bit, you realize that it's a 15-bit counter, which cycles every 3 minutes. So the unpredictable number is in fact predictable. So we decided to go out and test, and we found that about half of the ATM fleet that we've tested in the UK uses counters rather than proper unpredictable numbers. And this was rather fun. We went and we bought some used ATMs off eBay, and we then had to go to a warehouse in East London with our van and collect them from some people who looked very seriously dodgy. You know, a warehouse full of dead ATMs, dead pinball machines, dead gambling machines, and so on. So that was fun. And we took them to pieces and learned a bit, but not a huge amount. So what we did was to do open heart surgery on some live bank cards. And my colleague Sergei Skorobogatov, who's a wizard with microelectronics, added a memory chip, a timer, and a CPU to half a dozen bank cards and embedded this within the format of the card so that we had bank cards which we could put into full-throat ATMs and do transactions to record data. So we would take these bank cards to an ATM, we'd do 10 balance inquiries followed by a £20 withdrawal with very precise timings on the unpredictable numbers, which we were, of course, also able to record because they're in the data stream. And so we found that indeed about half of the ATMs in the UK are using counters rather than proper unpredictable numbers. And we then went and read the spec, and the spec says that in order to test a device for EMV, all you've got to do is to draw 4 unpredictable numbers from it and check that they're all different. So if you're a lazy programmer, you'll just make the thing into a counter because that way you can be sure it'll pass the test. Whereas if you use a random number, there's some small possibility that it wouldn't. So we had a paper at Auckland 2014. And since then, we won a key case. And we realized that this doesn't need fancy hardware, it can also be done in software. We first realized it could be done in software between colluding terminals, and then in software on one terminal, which records some transactions and then replays them later. And the key case walked in a year and a half ago, and this was a British sailor who had gone into a bar in Barcelona on that fancy main drag that they have going down to the coast. And he spent 33 euros on a round of drinks. And he then got hit with 10 transactions for 3,300 euros each, an hour apart. Basically, when he looked at his account the following day, Lloyds Bank had cleaned it out of £24,000. So he went to Lloyds, and Lloyds said, "Chip and pin is secure, go away. You know, you obviously had a good time in that nightclub, don't bother us about it." And so he got a lawyer, and the lawyer came to us, and we got the data, and we looked through the data, and there was clear evidence of tampering, because these 10 transactions have been filed through 3 different acquiring banks, and although it was the same terminal ID, there were different terminal characteristics on reported for different transactions. So it was clear that there was some kind of, bug in the bad guy's software. Since then, since we spoke about this, we have found that we have realized in old cases from Krakow in Poland and from Vilnius, and most recently we've got some new cases in Bournemouth in England which are using the same kind of thing. There was a councillor in Bournemouth contacted us, and he said that he was trying to cancel the license of a local strip club called the Spearmint Rhino. You couldn't make this stuff up. And so gentlemen who go into the Spearmint Rhino and pay £50 or so for a lap dance have this habit of finding that £5,000 has disappeared from their account, and they're too embarrassed to make much of a fuss about it. So I wrote a piece for the Bournemouth Echo explaining how this fraud happens, that there are clearly terminals out there which people have figured out how to load malware into. And after that appeared in the paper, there's a further 16 people came forward to the local councillor saying, yes, we were rolled in such circumstances. So that's the real world effect of malware in a payment terminal. But it could be worse than that, because in a number of these cases, the person who has been rolled gets drugged as well. They don't just serve you a drink that costs you thousands of pounds. They put some rohypnol or some chloral hydrate in it so that you pass out in the bar for a few hours. And therefore, you can't do other transactions elsewhere, which breaks the chain of preplay transactions that they've already booked. And I'm concerned that sooner or later this is going to be a murder case. And we've tried our best to get the local police in Dorset to take an interest in it, but no, it's cybercrime, so it's not our problem. Okay? Now, here's something that the average person doesn't think, that when you walk into a bar with your wallet in your pocket with, say, a debit card and a credit card, you're actually carrying maybe £20,000 with you. Because there's all the money you have in your current account, there's all the credit limits on your credit card, there's the extra credit that they'll give you despite, over and above your credit limit, and there's the amount of unauthorized overdraft they would give you in your current account. And that is probably enough money to add up to the price of a fairly nice car. Now, would you go into a bad nightclub with 20,000 euros in your pocket? Hey. You're doing it. If you go into a nightclub carrying a chip and pin card in your pocket in a world where there's terminal malware. Other terminal malware tricks. We discovered in 2010 the no-pin attack, where bad people can use a man-in-the-middle device to use a stolen EMV card for which they don't know the pin. There's a nice video on this. You can Google no-pin attack. I don't think I've got time to show it now, if I'm going to finish at 11:30. But it's there for the watching. And this was first done in France by adding electronics to stolen cards. And now we've found a case in Turkey where this appears to have been done by means of malware in a pin entry device. In other words, the pin entry device says that a pin was used even when it wasn't. And by protocol manipulation, you can get away with that. And we've seen another case in China where what may have happened is that you've got a SIM shim. That is, in China and some other places, you can get SIM cards that are 120 microns thick with contacts both sides and that are programmable. And these are used for GSM roaming. And if you can reprogram one of those, you can do a no-pin attack. So there are various ways, software and hardware, of delivering these kind of protocol attacks, which are going to get easier and easier in the future. So that's an overview of what you can do with malware. It's not everything, of course. There's been malware in ATMs, but it's perhaps a flavor of what can be done. What else do we think about? Well, we've been thinking about malware in mobile phones. One of the things that we did a couple of years ago was figuring out whether you can steal pins using phone malware. Now, if you've got a trusted operating system, Knox, TrustZone, or whatever, and you've got a bank app running on that, you might think that that may stop bank pins being leaked. But does it really? Well, people had looked at whether you could use an accelerometer or gyro, and they'd found that you can work out pins about half the time that way. So we looked at whether you could use the camera instead, and we found that indeed you can, because as you take your mobile phone out and you enter your PIN on it, then the phone wiggles backwards and forwards. And with appropriate machine learning techniques, looking at the user's face, you can get exactly the same signal that you would get from accelerometers and gyros. So this means that you've got to lock down the video camera as well. Is that enough? No, because we then went on and showed that the still camera in burst mode works just as well. And that's even better, because in Android you can run that as a background task rather than foreground. So work like this shows that the mobile phone is a lot more difficult to defend than a traditional desktop PC, because it's so much richer a computing environment. There's maybe 30 CPUs in there. There's so many side channels that can potentially be exploited. And the sheer complexity of the software brings in all sorts of other interesting failure modes. Latest work, which we came out with earlier this year, is that more and more phones are sold second-hand. Something like 300 million of the 1 billion Android fleet is operated second-hand. And when you buy a phone, you want to make sure there's no malware on it. And when you sell a phone, you want to sanitize all your personal data. So it would be a good idea if the factory reset button on your Android phone actually works. So Laurent Simon and I asked, does it really? And the news isn't good. We bought a couple of dozen Android phones from eBay, and in pretty well all cases we got the Google Master Cookie out after a factory reset. We found that it was trivial to spot personal data and credentials. This is because the OEMs who customized the Android code for these phones didn't understand the memory system. They didn't understand how NVRAM works. They didn't understand wear leveling. They didn't understand crypto footers. They didn't understand all sorts of other gruesome details that you really ought to understand if you're working for Samsung or HTC or whatever, and you're hacking around with the Android code. But basically, if you want to have a factory reset that works, then buying a Google Nexus is about the only option that you've got at the moment, which is kind of scary news. But still, most people don't care about security, so that's fine. They can buy the other brands. 340 million phones in total are vulnerable. The latest flavors of Android can help a bit because you have encryption on by default. And so with a bit of luck and a fair wind, factory reset will work, but you have to be careful that you actually get rid of the crypto footer. And it's also very, very helpful if you choose a really long, hard to remember password when you open your phone, which almost nobody does. So this is a complex business, and it's a hard engineering problem. How does it work? Mostly it's screw-ups by OEMs. Memory hierarchy is complex. So if you're a user, you had better at least encrypt your phone, and if you're an implementer, you'd better read our papers. If you're writing antivirus software, you should read them very carefully because of what I'll have to say in the next slide. If you're a reseller, you have to watch for crooked staff, because where this could be scaled is in those firms which handle thousands and thousands and thousands of second-hand phones. You know, give your phone to Oxfam and they'll send it to Africa for charity. Hey, just hope all the people handling that, both at this end and at the Africa end, know what they're doing. And now that there are markets for credentials, now that you can actually take several thousand stolen credentials and turn them into money, I expect that this attack might start to scale up. Attacks on remote wipe. This is the bad news for the antivirus industry. We tested the top 10 mobile antivirus products, and they're all awful. Because first they inherit the factory reset attacks. You can't do remote wipe if the factory reset function that you then call basically doesn't work. And if you're running as a user process and you don't have access to do anything more than just press that button. A number of the products introduced other unnecessary vulnerabilities, or they had usability issues with the interface that was presented to users to do the remote wiping. And there's an awful lot of details. See our paper. So what are we to do about all this? Well, my colleague Alistair Beresford has been running for the last couple of years a project called Device Analyzer, and this is an app that's been run on 23,000 Android devices. And this is run with full ethical approval of the lab's Research Ethics Committee and full user consent. We remind users every month that they're running Device Analyzer, and we point them all at a website which gives all the details and which also has links to all the papers that have been generated with research from it. What we do is collect lots of metadata from your phone: who's running what app, who's using what radio service, what are the traffic patterns. We anonymize your contacts using different salts for each phone so that you can't link social graphs across different phones. And we also have fairly stringent rules on who gets access to data and under what circumstances. And this has been used by quite a lot of researchers now. Over 200 researchers have used sample data. We've got 61 other bodies, mostly academic, who signed license agreements with us to get access to more, and a couple of joint projects where people get access to basically everything. And as of tomorrow, we're planning to scale this up into the Cambridge Cloud Cybercrime Centre, where we'll be looking not just at mobile phones, but at other kinds of bad stuff too. Now, my colleague Richard Clayton, who many of you know, will be directing the centre, and he has for years been getting feeds from takedown companies and some people in the AV business, which we use for cybercrime research. And this is all going to go together into one, hopefully shared platform, which people in the industry will be able to do research. Now, from the academic point of view, the big problem has been that if a research student tries to do work on cybercrime, then he spends the first 18 months trying to get access to data, coming to conferences like this and buying people beers and gradually winning people's trust. And then when he gets some data, there's so much of it he's swamped, and then he has to spend 6 months learning how to cope with Hadoop and MapReduce and stuff like that. And then he has maybe a few weeks to do actual work before he has to start writing up his PhD thesis. And then once he's done his thesis, Google or Microsoft hires him like a flash and he's off. And the data that he's collected are no longer of any use to anybody. And so this way of doing research just doesn't scale. You can't do it by means of open data because, as you know, most of the big data sets are dirty. And this leaves us with the problem that when we do research on cybercrime, is it even science if nobody else can repeat the work that we've done? Okay? So what we're trying to do is solve all these problems together by creating a center which will exist on a sustainable basis, and we've got a couple of million quid from our government to do this, so we can hire 4 people for 5 years to get it going. And we've got ThreatStop funding another person, and we hope that some of the firms here represented will join in and either fund other people or send staff on secondment. And we also want all your data, of course. And so what we're trying to do is, because we're an academic body and thus neutral and able to speak to everybody, we're in a position, we believe, to collect one of the biggest and most diverse data sets on cybercrime. And this is going to be all sorts of stuff: malware, spam, phish, DNS, mobile stuff, all sorts of things. And we're going to mine and correlate all these data to extract information about all sorts of bad stuff. What we hope to be able to do is to detect scams better and faster, and to invent the forensics of the future. This is what our funders are particularly interested in, that current forensics are lousy, expensive, and don't scale. How do we do things better in the future? And what we're planning to do is to create a sustainable center for academic research into cybercrime. And for that to work, other people have to be able to play too. So at present, when we get data from people, we sign your NDA and it says that only we can touch this data. What we're going to be doing over the next few months is going around and negotiating with people so that these agreements become agreements that are transferable to those people who sign a standard NDA with us. So somebody from the University of Lancaster or from MIT, for example, who comes to us and says, we want to do research on denial of service, will sign a standard NDA and we'll get access to data under standard terms and conditions. That's the thing that we believe will make it scale. And by the time we come to the end of our first funded 5-year period, we want to be judged not on how many papers we wrote in Cambridge, but how many papers others wrote, because we helped to make that possible. And we've already got our first undergrad student lining up to do a project on the data that we'll be putting into the center as of tomorrow. And ultimately, the social benefit is looking for ways to deter and detect criminals. So in conclusion, the malware world is changing. We've all known it as a PC thing since the late 1980s, but it's now happening on Android, it's happening on payment terminals, it'll be on your iWatch, it'll be on medical devices, it will be all over the place. And this raises many questions of technology and policy, which this community is reasonably well placed to have an opinion on, because many of these issues that we're now going to fight on a large scale are things that have been fought here on a smaller scale. The clean software stuff about whether adware is malware or not, for example, you're going to see tons of that. It's going to be all over the place. Now, how do you study this? Well, one of the things that we need is a toolkit for academics to look at it, and that's what we are building. And so we hope that many of you will share your data with us and join in this project. Here are the URLs. Cambridge Cloud Cybercrime Centre, cambridgecybercrime.uk. Device Analyzer, the thing that we've got running already, is deviceanalyzer.cl.cam.act.uk. There's our blog at Light Blue Touch Paper. There's my homepage, which has got tons of stuff on banking and so on. The workshop on economics and information security is one where we send a lot of our econometrics papers to. And of course, there's also my book, as Martijn was pointing out, which you can get for free. But cambridgecybercrime.uk is, if you're only going to visit one URL, I'd like that to be it. Thank you.